Next up is Toya Matthew. Toya Matthew is a member of the Writers Guild of Bloomington. She has written Antonia's Homefront, a transatlantic audio theatre co-production of political art, London, UK, and the Writers Guild of Bloomington. It premiered on WFHB's Firehouse Theatre on October 9th, 2022, directed by Richard Fish of WFHB, and it won a Gold Award from Here Now Festival in 2023. The author of the independently published chapbook Journey, she has been featured on WFIU's Poets Weave program, and her poems have appeared in Hearst, Wisconsin, The Writer, and Nimrod, among other publications. Thank you for being here, Tony. Come on up.
Get out the Aquarius.
Okay.
Yes,
I'll give you a hand up.
yes, and then if I have my walker.
Do you want me to put the Aquarius sign like here?
Yes.
Okay.
Not all of you will be able to see this, but there's a memento from Aquarius that we used to have inside the store. Outside the store we had a big hanging one. Yeah, that was beautiful, and it's really hard to read after something like that. That's so very moving. Thank you, thank you. This is mostly a practical account of Aquarius books, and I find that prose is much harder to read than poetry. You kind of get a breath between the poems, and when you're reading prose you have to kind of keep going. So I find myself getting a little, I've got a handkerchief here to press on my lips. I get a little dry. Okay, I'm going to be talking about Aquarius books for a feminist future. Once upon a time, there was a lesbian feminist bookstore in Bloomington. Once upon a time, there were feminist bookstores in many cities. Now there are fewer, and mainly in big cities. The same is true of small publishing houses that provided publishing opportunities for lesbian and lesbian feminist writers. You can go online and Google these topics and find out more about their growth and in many cases decline. But I want to spend my time talking about Aquarius. It opened on July 25th, 1986 at 116 North Grand Street as a branch of Dreams and Swords bookstore in Indianapolis, but became independent of Dreams and Swords in 1988 with the name of Aquarius Books for a Feminist Future. After a move to a tiny strip mall in the block of South Washington, where the east end of the bus terminal now is, more of that later, it closed on October 30th, 1995. Aquarius was owned and run by lesbian feminists, but it was there for all of what was called in those days the GLB community, as well as the recovery community, and for anyone of goodwill. At that time, the layout of the Grant building had not changed from when it was a residential house, and it had 3 women's businesses in it. Athena, an art and gift store, occupied most of the first floor. Gently Used Treasures, a used furniture store, was in the basement, and Aquarius had a room in the northwest corner of the first floor. And if you take this room from where the archway is and cut it in half and lower the ceiling, that's the space at Aquarius. There was also a tiny room to one side of the shop, which was used as a storage room. Behind the desk was an alcove containing women-made jewelry. Otherwise, the walls were covered floor to ceiling with shelves holding books, fiction, non-fiction, humor, poetry, self-help, recovery, and let me not forget the cassettes and CDs of women's music. At that time, At that time, the National Women's Music Festival was held on the IU campus, and having recordings of performers was important. There were some commercially popular books, but Aquarius was there for the community, especially for lesbians, and for young women who are on the point of coming out and are finding a new freedom at Aquarius to ask questions, find a relevant book. The store had only women at the desk. And gay men and bisexual people also felt welcomed. You may be thinking, well, this doesn't sound that special, but in the mid-80s there was still less openness about one's sexuality, and regular bookstores did not necessarily carry books on recovery or sexual orientation. And although Aquarius was a bookstore, it was also an unofficial safe place for the GLB and recovery communities. Sometimes people would strike up conversations with other customers, discuss the books, staying in the store for some time, or sometimes finishing the book and putting it back on their shelf and going home. On the weekends, women from surrounding counties, where there was perhaps no community, would come in to talk, but also to buy. Aquarius also traveled to other communities to set up shop in someone's living room or an event like Spencer's Gay Pride celebration. They had built folding bookcases in which the books were packed, and when opened, there was the store. Aquarius made enough to pay a manager, but the board were all volunteers, and other volunteers from the community, particularly at weekends, would run the store or help out with traveling, cleaning the store, shopping for supplies. It was truly a bookstore of and for the community. I mentioned that Aquarius traveled, and the biggest event attended was the market part of the festival. Vendors from all over the country came and sat up in one of the dormitory dining halls, and it was a chance to meet some of the people whose goods we sold. It was good to be among so much enthusiastic, strong women's energy. The store was kept open too, thanks to the volunteers. One of the big name musicians, Margie Adams, was a big supporter of lesbian bookstores and always paid a visit to the store and thanked us for carrying women's music, which was not available in regular stores. Then came a big change. Athena was doing so well, they had outgrown their first floor space, and they moved to a shop on the square where you may have shopped there. Nikki, who was manager at that time, one of the founders of the store, and who had called together the women who made up the board, who invested in the store and met regularly to discuss its progress, added Athena's space to Aquarius' space and moved the store into the larger space, turning the room that had been a store into a meeting place and the tiny storage room into a lending library. The new space was lighter, had display windows, 2 small gardens on either side of the steps outside which Nikki grew flowers in. The larger space drew more people in and increased variety of books that could be carried. Nikki had just become a grandmother, so she started to stock children's books. The space was very attractive, but I don't think that many more books were sold. We just had many more people coming in and reading. And I almost forgot when I was writing this to mention that Aquarius had a softball team. The store sponsored a softball team, and it was a nice evening activity to go sit on the bleachers and watch the teams play, and it gave women a chance to play softball, to be in a team they felt comfortable in. One time, Aquarius actually won the section they were in. Nikki wasn't very pleased about that because she thought you should play for the love of playing and not for winning. But the teams were delighted, and so were the rest of the community, and we had a party and celebrated. And we had, as well as having we had
Oh my God.
Somewhere I have written down. I'll try to remember it. because I thought I'd written it down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8. Who do we appreciate? Oh, bats. 3, 5, 9, 11. We're so old, we missed out 7. They were really wonderful evenings, they really were. Just marvelous. I mentioned earlier that the building had not been adapted for commercial use, so leading off the back of the big room that Aquarius was now in was a kitchen cum eating space and bathroom. A realtor told us that the door that led to those rooms must be kept locked. We didn't have the right to let people use the bathroom and the kitchen. And as far as I know, it was not used, but there were stories during a very frozen winter that some people whose pipes had frozen availed themselves of the facilities on occasion. At this time, I was working at Trinity Church as the parish secretary, and having met Nikki in a writing group, I would occasionally drop by and even help at the store. In this way, I learned what the women on the board already knew, that at the end of the school year, Nikki's daughter would graduate from high school, and Nikki would follow her dream and drive down to the southwest and join a women's community there. And no one had any idea who would take her place. I was only an occasional volunteer. I hadn't even come out yet, so I knew nothing of what was going on. Nikki brought to her management of Aquarius a unique combination of an astute businesswoman with a wise warmth that drew people into the store and brought them back not only for the books, but for talking things over with her about being out and part of the community. When she left, that was lost. There were 2 managers after Nikki, the last one being myself. The first one after Nikki left was young and did not manage to keep up with the billing, so the store no longer had the privilege of ordering books and paying for them later. The bookstore, at least at that time, finances sort of worked strangely. You ordered your books, and within a certain period of time, if they didn't sell, you could return them, and that gave you credit. And since we weren't keeping all our bills, we lost that ability. She resigned, and the board kept the store open and running and invited me to become manager, which I did, knowing I could never fill Nikki's shoes. The board was very supportive, volunteering, helping me with the books as in money, and ordering until I began to get the hang of things. Volunteers decorated the front windows, helped with unpacking and mailing out books. We did use the space that we had moved out of. Recovery groups met there, play readings and poetry readings were held there, and a lending library of books and CDs as well as DVDs. Claire of the Moon had just come out and was a big attraction. We didn't charge for rentals. This was a service for the community, and it did bring more people into the store. Aquarius was beginning to get on its feet. New customers because of increased visibility, and credit was starting to be restored when there was a change in ownership of the building. The previous owner of the building had many larger business interests in town and rented out the spaces at rents that we could all afford. The new owner of the building raised the rent for Aquarius and gently used treasures to prices we could no longer afford. Gently used treasures relocated to a basement on Kirkwood under what is now a high rental apartment. And Aquarius, after much talking, visiting of available spaces at affordable prices, the discussion moved, as I said earlier, to a strip mall, which is no longer there, along with a mail order of rare books business and a wonderful, completely volunteer-run by women boxcar books, which is the only one of us 3 to survive, made up most of the business in the strip. Again, the board stepped up, decorating the new space, putting up shelves, loading and unloading all the books, joined by the generous volunteers of the community who also took turns at the desk. But this was not a prime location. 3rd Street was a real barrier. But we had speakers come in the evenings to talk on topics of interest to the GLB community. We stayed open on the evenings at the Black Box Theatre. Its first location was in this strip with the entrance off the alley. And when they had performances and when there were events in 3rd Street Park in the evening, a mobile coffee shop owned by 2 lesbians would set up in front of the store. At daytime and evening events, volunteers would walk around the park handing out leaflets with discount coupons on them. We even held suppers with speakers in the lesbian-owned diner, When Pigs Fly. Perhaps if there had been the wide scope of the internet with email lists, we might have continued in business. But Barnes and Noble and Borders and Barnes and Noble moved in. The mega stores backed by companies such as Warner Brothers. They had enough financial backing they could order in larger quantities than the independent bookstores like Aquarius, so they paid a lower price for books, which increased their profits. All the independent bookstores and women's and lesbian magazines were experiencing the same problem. Sojourner magazine that specialized in reviewing GLB books folded. The Women's Review of Books did step up and now reviews more LGBTQ plus books. The small independent presses that new authors depended on, such as Firebrand, Cleese, the Kitchen Table Press, which specializes in books by women of color, and the Crossing Press, closed because they could not produce their books in quantity that the megastores required for getting a discount. Finally, Aquarius was put up for sale. We did have some interested parties, but they too could see the problems, and none had any new and original ideas. So we got ready to close. We held a book sale, gave what remained to the Monroe County Public Library, and our historical photos and documents to the Kinsey Institute, and paid all our bills. This was really important to us, that we didn't just close and owe anybody money. We paid all our bills. On Saturday, October the 30th, we held a farewell ritual and a potluck supper and dropped our keys into the landlord's mail slot. But this wasn't only a bookstore that closed, and this is true of any LGBTQ plus bookstore that closes. A community is lost. I felt particularly sad about the women who came in from out of the county to shop at Aquarius. Would they be able to find another community? Diversity is lost, her story is lost. New authors, if they have been lucky enough to find a publisher, won't receive the special treatment that all independent bookstores give the first-time author, the by-hand selling, where the bookstore worker approaches the browsing customer and asks them if this author might interest them and say a little something about the book. I do want to say that when Aquarius closed and the mail order bookstore just stayed on mail order bookstoring their books from home, that we did have a Morgenstern's at that time. It was in the Eastland Plaza, and Morgenstern's also was hit by Borders and Barnes and Noble, as was the IU bookstore. Borders took it over, and it's never been the same since. So we're absolutely delighted that Morgenstern's could find the financing and reopen. That sort of one up on the megas that closed all the independent bookstores. It's a wonderful store. The people are very helpful. They have a wide range of books, and they have LGBTQ books, and we're just delighted that we also have the book corner at the moment, but we used to have more bookstores. We used to have, it was Howard's. We used to have Howard's. There used to be a religious bookstore, and there used to be the Book Nook, which was really was a little nook. You sort of went up steps into an attic, and it was on the corner of Indiana and Kirkwood. And of course we still have the IU bookstore, but it's just not the same. As I was saying, one of the important things about independent bookstores is they get to know their customers, and so they can go over and point out a new book and say, this really might interest you. And if that doesn't happen, if the megas, the Waters and the Barnes and Noble continue, then the small authors don't get that special treatment. And the importance of small independent presses must be mentioned. They were business interested in unknown authors writing on mainstream subjects. The word is that when Barbara Kingsolver first started writing her books, it was sort of a different and difficult subject, and in independent bookstores, both feminist and independent, hand-sold her books by telling people, we've got this new feminist author, you really enjoy what she's writing about, it's going to be different. And that launched her. She started off with one of the small independent presses and was able to move on to one of the larger ones. And that's the sort of thing that the independent bookstores can do. And I'm sorry that Aquarius closed. It's a loss. But I'm glad that it exists for some time, and that even in its short life, it filled a need and created a space that was important to many. Thank you.